in.
Good morning or happy Thursday or whatever time of day it is for you guys joining us. Thank you very much for being here. Today I have a very special guest, my friend Dr. Haydon Mort, who runs Geologize, and he's a geoscientist and educator and does all kinds of cool stuff. And he is coming to the US next week. So we have a really great conversation today, I think, lined up for you guys. But ultimately, Haydon is a champion of diverse thinking and advanced communication, and is really, I think, helping pave the way for a better future for the mining industry. So, welcome, Haydon. Thank you for being here, and let's dive in.
Yeah, let's dive in. Hit me. I can't wait. And if anyone has any comments or questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I have the comments open here, so I'm happy to respond on the fly. Okay.
Awesome. So, my first question is generally what's getting you excited about your work, or what are you passionate about now that you're working on, Hayden?
Wow, it's so much. There's so much stuff. I don't want to put any sound bites out there to like, oh, this, that, and the other, because we all like to say everything's wonderful, and of course, work is a daily grind, and you've got to make ends meet, and that's the way it is. But what gets me excited every day are the stories that I hear from people who have engaged and understood the value of communication within the mining industry and within any area of the geosciences that they're engaged with. But we're talking about mining today. And so just that, I get comments most weeks actually from people, whether it could be mining engineers or geologists or mid-management, talking to me about how engaging with my company's training has helped them in diverse ways that we can get onto. But the most exciting part of that, personally, is where it comes to a company's social license to operate in a particular region. And as you know, one of the biggest challenges that many mining companies face, especially junior mining companies, is the time it takes from, you know, uh, discovery to extraction. And that is mostly down to a social license or lack of, and their failure to communicate what they're doing effectively. And for me, the bigger picture of the energy transition is really important to get that time between discovery and extraction down, and how communication and understanding the brain can actually help deliver that social license and the energy transition that depends on the license. So that's what gets me most excited every day.
You know, I think you broke that down so nicely into some parts that I would like to talk a little bit more about, because your orientation truly is understanding how the brain works, and then kind of getting into some other stuff. So, and I find it fascinating that this is the area that you've chosen, because I think there's so much opportunity, and as you said, getting that social license to operate and getting that time down from exploration into actual production, etc. There's so much that needs to happen, and we loosely talk about this as telling the story or communicating differently or getting out of the silo of mining. And so I could go a bazillion directions about this, but what you're excited about, and I'm also really excited about, but I love the way that you're talking about it. So let's start sort of at the core. You have this background of understanding how the brain works, and so get me from where you did that into when you got into geosciences and sort of married these two ideas.
Well, it actually was the other way around. So I
Okay,
like the
sorry.
geoscience first. Yeah. So it was the Grand Canyon. It was that old story about being curious, and Grand Canyon like set me off. What is this all about? It's amazing. And then I did my degree and did my master's, and then I did my PhD, all in geology. And that was all kind of somewhat boringly like linear in its trajectory. And then something happened in my life which kind of turned everything upside down for me. I married my first wife. That's not what turned everything upside down. Okay. That's not what happened. But something that happened straight after that, um, she forgot who I was. She had a, a clinical issue with her brain, which meant that she didn't recognize me. She didn't actually believe that I was Haydon in this case. And that was obviously a disaster. But I made it my mission to. I almost jacked in my PhD. It was like caring for somebody with these kinds of issues. People forget how much care is sacrificed, but it's hard. It's really hard. But I thought maybe the best way I could help in this case would be to actually understand what was happening at the level of the brain. So I found out, for example, in this case, that part of the brain called the fusiform gyrus, which recognizes faces, became disconnected with the amygdala, which orchestrates the appropriate emotional response to the face. So in other words, she actually recognized me, but she didn't have the emotional reaction that she was meant to have, which meant that she thought that I was an imposter pretending to be Haydon. And that actually was replicated with other people, like her mom, for example, and other people around her. And mixed in with schizophrenia and psychotic episodes was very hard. But I just found it, setting aside that very difficult part, I just found it fascinating the way brains can go wrong. And I became particularly fascinated about the neurology of attention and memory formation. And these are actually the key. Those are the fundamentals of communication. Because if you want to grab someone's attention, if you want them to commit to memory what you're saying or what you're doing, you have to actually, operate with the neurological apparatus that nature has given us over millions of years. If you don't communicate in a way that resonates with that structure, what you will say will go in one ear and out the other. And that is mostly the strategy that the mining industry has adopted hitherto. And so I'm here to kind of disrupt that and say, wave a flag here for the neuroscience. Hey, by the way, there's a better way of doing it. Anyway, cut long story short, I didn't see the immediate relevance at that time, back about 22 years ago. But
Mhm.
over the course of 15 years, this knowledge and neurology and brains, and I kept that up as a hobby, kind of had this tectonic collision, very slow-mo, between the geosciences. And that's what eventually gave rise to Geologize, uh, just at the beginning of the pandemic as a company. So yeah, that's the story. That's the backstory.
That's really interesting, and I like your pun using tectonic shift there. Um, but I think you're right that we have to figure out better ways of communicating with one another, but also something that you said early on in that story was that you needed to come from a place of understanding.
Hmm.
And I think as an industry, and I think you're probably in concert, but you might have a more eloquent way of saying this than I do, is, or another way of saying this is meeting them where they're at, right? Like we have a whole population of individuals who know very little about what we do in the mining industry.
Hmm.
We even have people within the mining industry that are very unaware of what other people in the mining industry do. And so figuring out how we can talk to one another and how we can understand where somebody else is coming from and then move forward together seems like a logical starting point. So, I guess I'm totally with you on how that could have emerged, and I find it really, really interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about Geologize.
Okay. Uh,
Tell me
Sorry.
more about your mission and some of the courses that are going on, and then I'm sure I'll have some other questions. But I'd like to hear what's
Okay.
going on because you're going to be here next week.
Yeah. Yeah. We can dive into working with the brain, what the mining industry should be doing
Yeah.
instead. But in
Okay.
terms of what's going on with Geologize, you know, it's Geologize itself. You asked about Geologize's mission in general is to shift public's perception of the geosciences. We'll talk about why that's relevant to mining in general. But when I started it, this was a general good for the geosciences that I wanted to do. That I saw a falling interest in geology, in STEM in general, actually, but especially in the earth sciences, which is very problematic because if we really want to um, not social license for mining, but if we want a license or we want the public to shift its behavior and become a more sustainable society, they need to feel in some way more connected, more viscerally connected with the planet,
Right.
because then they will behave more differently towards it. And then when they do that, because of the falling enrollment at university, and this connects to the mining industry in a moment, but um, we have geoscience departments shuttering or decreasing in size around the world, especially in developed countries. Um, and this is a massive problem too. So I was actually at the Image conference in Houston last week, a couple of weeks ago, and we had the CEO of Total saying, "We can't get graduates anymore. We just can't get them. So what we're doing is we're just getting them from India instead." Now that's nothing against people from India, but it's a real shame that they've kind of washed their hands with graduates coming out from developed countries. And it almost felt like they were throwing those departments under the bus somewhere. And so my mission in that case, in that area, would be to first order concern shift public behavior and perception and interest in the geosciences so that parents and children, parents incentivize their children to choose a geoscience related subject at university. This is going to be really important to address some of the massive problems we have right now facing the planet, but especially for the mining industry. It's getting those engineers, it's getting those geologists, and getting people who can work with those industries, and they get that talent pipeline. And this is your area, get that talent pipeline unblocked, so we get people into the sector. So for all of these reasons, I thought we have to communicate better. I mean, it's actually really essential for sustainability and for the companies which are delivering a sustainable future. So let's do this, and that's the reason why I started it.
I really love the purpose, and I think that we need more ambassadors for it. So I'm really excited about the work that you're doing, and sort of the strides that you're making, and all of those that you're getting to visit with, because I think that we've seen the graduate levels go down here in the US and Canada and everywhere else, as you've mentioned. But I think that, we have to start at a much younger demographic. And so, just as you said, getting people interested in how can they help create fresh water, how can they create something more sustainably, where does something even come from? I mean, I joke that I tell my kid, like, where does milk come from? Oh, a cow. Well, you have to go to the farm. This is how this happens. Same thing. Where do you get copper from? Right. And most kids, most adults probably can't answer that question. And so creating a foundation of understanding and education, and then creating the ability for them to impact it differently so that it is more sustainable, and has a strong vision of why we're doing it and how it's needed and how we can do it better, is something that I love to talk about and do often with many, many people that I talk to on a routine basis. I just really appreciate the work that you're doing to try to actually impact that.
Thank you. It's like it's hard. It's a hard slog. I mean, the standard way that we do that, don't we? We kind of say, "Hey, here's your phone right here." Like, right. So, where does this come from? And you can imagine that it's going to attract that kind of messaging will, get some people interested.
Sure.
But most people, to be honest with you, don't really care. They take it for granted.
Yeah.
And if they know where you're coming from, which is a mining background, then what you say is subject to diminishing returns in terms of impact, because you encounter something which I've come up against before I changed my approach, called the advocacy paradox, where you say something, but because you are who you're saying, you are who you are. What you say doesn't have the impact that it should have, because you have a vested interest in it.
Sure.
And we wouldn't let a judge judge their son or daughter in the dock, for example, and we wouldn't let a student mark their own homework. Why would we let the mining industry say how great they are, and you just throw that out? So how do we get around that? How do we think outside the box in a way which, remember, we're not trying to manipulate people. This is not some kind of Jedi mind trick we're trying to pull here, but we're trying to find a way which actually does something very important, which is shift public perception for society's good, so that we can execute the energy transition, which is maybe one of the biggest endeavors that humanity has ever tried to do.
Absolutely. I mean, at least in our lifetime. And I think that it's really, we talk a lot about it as an industry, and it really is massively frustrating to go to a conference and recognize how far we've come, but yet how far we still have to go. And as you said, we have talent issues, and that's exacerbated by the fact that we're painted as an industry as a bad guy, as mining is a dirty word, is a dirty industry. And so changing that public perception is key to getting interest in coming in to help fix it, to help change it, to do anything. And as a recruiter, I've spent a lot of my career talking to college individuals, from very early on in college. And sometimes when I have the opportunity, all the way down to elementary school but it's hard to get in and it's hard to routinely make that impact. And I think in some locations, it's a much more welcome scenario. It's much more, Canada is a resource-based economy, and I think that they have just a general understanding or appreciation for what mining is and what it does. But in the US, I think that, we almost never think about it, and if they do, they think it's coal, or they visualize the seven dwarfs or something ridiculous. And these are answers that I get when I talk to people, say, like, what do you know about mining? Or when somebody says, what do you do? And I say, oh, I do recruitment in the mining industry. They're like, we still mine? And, trying to match that sort of lack of understanding and say, in fact, there's mining all over the world, and it's not just for diamonds or for whatever you might see in movies. It impacts all different areas of life.
Yeah.
And so it's a conversation I have often. I'm going to have to pick your brains on how to do it better, and see if we can make any impact. But, I think moving forward, what are your thoughts on how we do this better? How do we get to have conversations so that we don't just talk to one another about how great we are and what we need to change?
Well, first of all, thank you for going out and doing that kind of outreach, because we need more people to do that. It's really important. How do we do it better? So yeah, of course, we do talk to each other in our silos, and we do engage on inappropriate social media platforms such as LinkedIn, because this is talking to each other. This is an echo chamber. By definition, it's an echo chamber. So there are two ways in when you do reach out and do it, go to schools and public forums. I would recommend two ways of doing it better. And I just have to be careful not to trip over myself, because I'm likely to forget the second reason. So the first thing is, we can't do it every day. I mean, even if we had an armada of people going out there, we literally can't go into the classrooms every day and talk about this. It's the teachers who are there. They're mostly geography, probably, but also some parts of the science curriculum, cover geology. And I've understood, talking to K-12, people who engage with K-12, that the curriculum in the States is pretty poor when it comes to representing the geosciences. Now, instead of going in, parachuting in and saying, hey, what do you know about mining? All that, is it even in the curriculum, right? Is it there? Are they going to be exposed to that every year, confidently? Are the teachers, do they have to tick that box when they go through the curriculum? The answer is probably no, okay? And so therefore, we have to be clever enough to come up with material that we can give to the teachers, which does tick the teachers' boxes, because the curriculum's already crowded. Let's be honest about it. We want to give them more work to do. They'll just say, oh, I can't do it. I've got time. So we need to actually work with the curriculum and reverse engineer whatever we want to say on the back of what the teacher has to do. Okay. So we are approaching it from the teacher's perspective and not giving them any more work. In fact, we're removing work from them by giving them a scheme of work that they can implement, which has within it stuff about maybe not even necessarily the mining sector, but minerals, for example, and helping children understand, and they can come to their own conclusions based on critical thinking activities within the scheme of work, that they will come to the conclusion themselves that mining is important. Okay, so we're not going there as a representative of the industry, which carries the advocacy paradox. We're not going in there for that. We're helping students en masse with these schemes of work, which are much more present than we can ever be, come to the conclusion themselves. Okay, that will be much more impactful, I believe, in getting more graduates at university to do these relevant subjects. Okay, that's the first thing. But it's a big thing. We need to work together to do that. The second thing I would say, going back to neuroscience, is stop saying what's expected. Right? We say what's expected. It's the fastest way to be forgotten when it comes to neuroscience and communication. So there's a part of the brain called the basal ganglia. Basically, it decides what is sent to your prefrontal cortex, which is the seat of your consciousness, and that is where you attend to things. That's your active working memory. Okay, and so if the basal ganglia isn't, if you say what's expected, right, it's a bit like driving down the road every day. You've done the same trip for 10 years. You can get to the office without any memory of the path that you've just driven. You can do that. It's automatic. That's because the basal ganglia is receiving all the visual stimulus of everything that's happening around you and has decided not to actually alert your prefrontal cortex as to what's happening because it is just normal. The same thing goes to an expected message. If the message is expected, it's simply not attended to with the same intensity as something is unexpected. Okay, so if the Pope says he believes in God, okay, well, not really very expected, not really okay. Well done. But if he said he doesn't believe in God, the basal ganglia is going to kind of rush that to the front of the brain. The attention is going to be grabbed. Okay, so if the mining industry says we're important, you need us, well, they're just being arrogant again. Minerals on a smartphone, yeah, advocacy, whatever. You hear it, but you don't do anything about it. It doesn't activate the basal ganglia. It doesn't send a message to the hippocampus, which decides whether something is memorized or not. But then, if it is memorized, if you do attend to something, then the memory, and that's what we are a collection of memory, then the memory of the person will change. It will store something, and therefore the person's perspective on that subject will change over time if you continuously reinforce that. So we need to remove ourselves from the equation. We are not the mining industry. We just want to educate. Okay, that's the first thing. Take away the advocacy paradox, and then educate in a way which is neuropedagogically proven to work, and that is creating emotion in the person, okay, and helping them attend to things by creating unexpected and interesting links, which we know make somebody really interested and want to know more, okay. And there are a diverse way to do that, many ways to do that, which we get into, but those are the two main ways that you have to communicate, especially with school children, if you want to get their attention, but also for adults too, who greatly influence their children. I feel like I've spoken too much.
Well, this, we launched right into it, and I really appreciate your explaining both of those because I think there are so many people that I talk to that want to do this better. And having those two pillars of understanding, I think, will enable people to change their way of thinking so they can have meaningful conversations, not just with children, but with anybody that perhaps doesn't know what we're up to as an industry. So, thank you for sharing that. And I guess my next question really is on sort of part two. How do we craft those sort of statements or scenarios where it catches people off guard? I mean, I know I do stuff like this with my kid where I'll be like, you know, can you hop to the car? Versus like get in the car, right? And he's like, yeah, I can hop to the car. And it just shifts his entire perspective because we're having a game rather than, me telling him to do something. And so perhaps that's, a really lame example, but I think that people do respond to something different. And so maybe it's as simple as saying, we need you to help us solve a big problem. You think differently than us.
Right. Okay. So, yes. So let's take a really extreme example because it helps to sometimes like make this big contrast,
Sure.
and people can then start to connect the dots themselves, and then we can flesh it out a bit after that. But let's say, let's say a mining company stands up and says, "No ifs, no buts. you know, we've been not very good. Yeah, we've kind of shirked our environmental responsibilities, and I think the mining industry needs to be held accountable for that. That's just one thing. Now, somebody can be waiting for an if or a but you still need us, something like that. No, take it off the table. The mining company put a post out to say something like this. They're going to be really worried. The reason why they wouldn't do that? The reason why they wouldn't do that is not because they don't want to be painted, or they don't want the public to think badly of them, because the public will actually be interested. How come a mining company say that? The reason why they don't do that today is because they're all listed on the stock market and they need capital. They need to raise capital for their work. And so we can get onto that. And I talk a lot in my upcoming course about investor diversity and how you shouldn't go for the normal investors all the time. But that would grab someone's attention straight away. In the same way, and I've spoken a lot with environmental activists, including Extinction Rebellion, right? If Extinction Rebellion was to turn around and say, we support mining for the energy transition. Now, that would be something that any member of Extinction Rebellion, any environmental organization, including Greenpeace, it would go viral, because it's like, what the heck is this all about?
Right.
Okay, now, as I said, I've spoken with Extinction Rebellion off the record. I can't say who it was, but it's very senior. And they said, you know what, Haydon, our hands on heart, we know we need mining. Okay, it's absolutely we need mining. The reason why we can't publicly endorse mining is because they don't have their act together when it comes to equity, social equity, environmental protections. Um, their ESG uh, their ESG labels are not watertight enough. They pay companies who don't do a very good job in actually doing the ESG, and we don't see a significant return, a social or environmental return to the communities that mining companies are involved with. All right, now there's a lot to break down there, but I almost said the name there, but they also said. Um, However, if a company was to tick all those boxes, then we would put our seal of approval on that mining operation. Now, what that does is that if Extinction Rebellion's logo was to appear on the propaganda or shareholder material of a mining company, suddenly what would happen? You would get the basal ganglia activated big time, sending messages to the prefrontal cortex of not only ESG and impact investors who would probably pour money into that mining operation, but it would also work very well on social media, and you would get suddenly environmental activists who are way more organized and energized on social media than the mining industry. They would come into the mining and say, wow, what is this all about? They too would have the same automatic neurological response as the impact investors. And so it's a way of working, saying what's not expected, even if it comes to branding. Extinction Rebellion, a mining company, what the heck is that all about? You are working with the brain to actually provide a social license for that company to operate. And that's also going to be inspiring for the next generation who are very concerned about the environment at school. So mining's actually not that bad. So we've moved away from the school here into the corporate realm of what can be actually done at level of brain. But you see how it kind of works in practice, I guess.
No, absolutely. And I think something that you said that's really interesting. And as we're moving from sort of educating outsiders, but moving into a more corporate realm, how we tell our stories and who endorses us to be responsible members and attract investment. I think the junior market particularly has been underfunded for quite some time now, and figuring out how to talk to alternative investors who may not, we've gone to the same well, the well is dry, and now how else do we get investment into some of these more junior projects and exploration companies? I think what you're talking about could potentially do it even without the seal of approval of a Greenpeace or anybody else. And so how can mining companies really start doing that better. Because I think often we just see drill results and we're talking to technical people that might just be savvy about it. But we're talking about shifting this entirely on its head and saying, let's do this differently and maybe you'll attract some alternative investment. So what's the silver bullet? Is there one?
Okay, I mean, it's massive. I don't tend to have all the answers. I tend to approach these things from a very high level, like in terms of the brain, in terms of what actually what would work. And you give me an idea, and then I will tell you if it works or not. But so I have been thinking about these things for a while. Now you said that the well's almost dried up, but you wouldn't think about it to see the number of mining investment conferences around the world, which happen pretty much every other week.
Yes.
I think there's one happening in Beaver Creek right now, right?
Right now.
Right now. So there you go. You have Rick Rule. You have everybody's down there thinking of the next best thing. CEOs, they strategically choose these mining conferences to have the best impact for their stock price. And it's very often, I mean, I don't know if you've heard of it, the PDAC curse, for example. It's real. There's a lot of data behind it. Mining companies, rosy forecasts going into PDAC. People buy their stock and a few months later dump it when it's high, and they're left with a big black hole in their budget, and often they go bust. But this boom and bust in the junior mining sector is really, really unhealthy when it comes to the energy transition. Not only is it no way to run any business, but it's really bad if we want to get to net zero. All right. So it's incumbent upon the industry as a whole to communicate more effectively in order to even out these market fluctuations. Because at the end of the day, it's all very well raising a lot of capital, even if they are penny stocks, but they raise capital, and then have it go bankrupt before they've even reached extraction. Right. So that can't happen like that. And so how do we use communication? How do we leverage communication to target different kinds of investors? You can't, as I said, you can't just use a Jedi mind trick. Communication is not a silver bullet. You have to back it up with real action. So if you're going to make a mining industry company attractive to ESG, but especially target investors who aren't necessarily, and I've spoken to a lot of them, who aren't necessarily looking for a return. They just want to get the money back. They're really only interested in making a positive difference to the community where the mining operation is operating. They will come on board as equity investors, mostly about 50% of equity investors. And so what you need to do then is you need to totally rebrand your communication and make your mining company not about how many ounces are in the ground and all that kind of stuff, but actually really focus much more on what you're doing to help, to bring up the local community, what you're going to do for the country, environmental, so everything. And even ESG, which has kind of got a bad rap, is that there's been this, what happened to the ESG. There's this documentary, you may have seen it on the Financial Times. It's got a bit of a bad rap at the moment. The benchmarks aren't always as critically thought out as possible.
Right.
So target investors, they don't really think about the ESG exactly. They think about, show me exactly what you're doing now. We will invest if you're doing a good job, right? So how do you communicate that? Okay, it's a fundamental rethinking of the whole paradigm of mining investment, but that requires a fundamental shift in the paradigm of communication too.
It really does. And, I think I've had the opportunity to talk at several conferences about how do we attract talent? How do we put in EVPs? How do we create a compelling value statement for retention, for attraction, for investment, and all of these things? And so what you're talking about lumps right into that. But I think that there is such resistance to change, right? Because it hasn't been proven yet. And I think we're getting to a point, and I think that this is a fairly bold statement, but I think we're getting to a point where we're not going to have a choice. We're not going to have a choice when it comes to energy transition. We're not going to have a choice when it comes to attracting talent. We are just going to have to do things differently, or we will be paralyzed. And I think sometimes fear and being stuck create that change a lot faster than we're ready for it. And so, I think that there are a lot of interesting thinkers. I think that there are a lot of people who really do find this quite compelling, but, reach stopping blocks because people just aren't quite ready for that internally. And
Yeah.
we're not going to have space for that. And I
Yeah.
think we're very quickly approaching that. And so the faster our companies start to recognize this in the industry and even outside, because I work with a fair amount of companies that come and say, we recognize mining isn't going away and we solve X, Y, and Z problems, but we don't know anything about mining. Can you help us? And I love that problem, but they already have a very different philosophy on what's going on and how to approach it. And they're influencing companies to do things differently, as well as their inability to attract talent. And so companies are saying, well, now we have to talk differently. We have to go to different conferences. We have to be on different social media platforms. And so it's sort of happening a little bit, but it's not as advanced and it's not happening as fast as probably you and I and others would like to see it. And so I think we're getting there, but I really appreciate having the conversation and allowing others to comment. And so I'm sort of seeing some comments and I wanted to address a few of them because I think that they're in line with what we're talking about. But I love this piece of the equation and I could talk forever about it. So just looking at some comments, brand perspectives and the meaning of words for both extinction rebellion and a mining company. Fundamental change in the way business is conducted overall, especially in the sector. So more comments than questions, I think, but I think we're at least seeing people echo what we're talking about a little bit, which is really nice. And I had a similar conversation yesterday, so maybe we're getting there.
Yeah, I think it's just important to just emphasize that there's so many innumerable like regional nuances when it comes to communication and acceptance of any kind of mining activity that I think it just has to be said very quickly. Like, but there's there's two things I want to say about this. Like, and as you said, in Canada, depending on where you are in Canada, again, more regional nuances just in Canada. They have quite a high level of acceptance, and sometimes, especially in the Ring of Fire in Ontario, quite poor acceptance due to recent activities. In other countries like Ghana, where gold has been a part of their heritage and history, the royal family for hundreds, if not thousands, of years, they actually like gold mining there. But if you just go not too far away in the DRC, then we have a very poor reputation, and so that's the first thing. The second thing, I'm about to trip over myself and forget what I was going to say now, is that I've forgotten. That happens sometimes.
Well, we might pick it back up as we kind of continue on. But I think another thing that I wanted to talk about was a bit more about sort of using communication as a tool, right? Because this cuts across every single area that we've talked about. Attraction of investment, attraction of talent, retaining talent, figuring out how we actually do things better. And so, from your perspective, this is exactly where you're functioning in your work with Geologize and other groups out there. So let's talk, how does one person go and perhaps influence change internally by utilizing communication a little bit differently so that others see that it's working for them? Like, how would you advise them to do that?
Are you talking about public engagement or internal engagement?
Internally in a mining company.
Okay. Okay, so I guess there would be two things I would say about that. Is that often the communication and how it's framed within the company is a cultural thing, and the culture normally is implemented and set in some, not stone, but in some way from the top. And so then the CEO and senior leadership becomes really important in setting an example of how people can communicate. And so open doors, for example, is really important. Um, I had, I've had actually at least three just in Australia. People come to me, boots on the ground, geologists and engineers come to me and say they've been basically shut out, and not and ignored and just told to do their work, when they've come with ideas and suggestions to actually save the company money, not a little bit, like $3 million a week, Australia. And they were just thinking outside the box. And so then mid management came to them and said, just do your job. They're not paying you to do the kind of calculation. They just saw perfectly good at all going to tailings. They just made a back of the envelope calculation. How about this? Get back to work, right? Now, that, mid management person who said that, or maybe mine site manager, I don't know, obviously wasn't being very thoughtful and not thinking outside the box and being a bit mean. But why? Why would somebody who thinks like that be in a position like that? How can they have actually got the job in the first place? Maybe they were stressed, having a bad day, fine, give them that. But at the same time, this goes to recruitment and who's actually doing the recruiting, and then who's actually telling the recruiters what to look for in these kinds of positions. And for me, that's probably senior leadership. Okay. And so if senior leadership is setting that example, that's why I'm saying it filters down this whole culture throughout the organization. If senior leadership can actually set an example of putting their feet on the table, not literally, maybe, I don't know, it depends who they are, and relaxing, and saying, okay, I don't know the answer. Okay, I would like people to speak. I'm going to ask questions. I don't expect you to know the answer, but maybe you could look for the solution for me, because I generally don't know. So you're being open. They're not being forceful. They're empowering people to come to solutions. They're listening way more than speaking. Sure. It's actually really bad in the classroom. Teacher talk. You're going to minimize that totally. It's the same in the boardroom. The senior leadership need to step back and recognize half of communication is listening. It sounds obvious when we say it, but many people don't understand that. They just speak. That's how they're taught to communicate in seminars at university and stuff like that. They come through. And I would say it's not even 50-50 with senior leadership. It should be like 20 or 80. It should be 20% speaking. And so having that open doors, having that kind of culture filtered down, and setting that example, a successful company that listens to its employees and respects them and treats them with dignity, and this also goes to diversity too, then that will probably filter down. That example probably wouldn't have happened with that mine site manager doing that. So yeah, those are kinds of things I would say internally make a real difference. But anybody can learn how to empathize with anybody higher or lower in the organization. Before you send an email, you don't come with a request. You understand the person who you're speaking to first. Empathy. It's actually called strategic empathy. Understand what the person you're speaking to wants. Okay, what they are concerned about. And in the same way that I was talking about reverse engineering your message for the classroom, you reverse engineer what you want, your ask, on the back of what the person you're sending the email or whatever your communication means is, on the back of what they are concerned about. And you're much more likely to get a helpful response. So these are the general techniques, I would say.
And I agree with you. I think that part of what you're talking about inherently is creating a culture of psychological safety as well, right? Not just an open door or listening, but because you can listen, but somebody might not feel safe to talk or share those insights. But I think that there's so much to be learned from the individuals doing the work, as you said. And so that capability to honor those pieces of information and say, how can we do better? How can we empower you to help us as an organization? That's a value that you're putting in as a company. And so some of this, I think, has the power from a middle management, from that very doer sort of stage to sort of trickle throughout. Because I think when people recognize that they have some wins, or that they have really well-adjusted teams that are productive, that then the rest of the company tries to say, like, well, they're doing really great over there. Let's take some of those lessons learned and plug them in over here or over here. So perhaps I'm overly optimistic about that. I think that it does have a lot of power.
Yeah, no, so you're right.
So we have a question, and we've gabbed away. We're at 45 minutes roughly, which is really really easy to do. But in honoring everybody's time who's
Sure.
with us today, I'd like to shift to a few questions and then just sort of open it up to those of you who might be joining us to engage and ask some questions. I do have to kind of cap it off at roughly an hour, so we've got about 15 minutes. The first question looks like, Haydon, what are your thoughts around how the brain responds to group environments since we evolved to be social as survival versus individuals and their environments? Is
Yeah.
their group?
Wow. This is an awesome question. I see in the private chat. This is from Janice. People are in British Columbia. So thank you, Janice. This is a great question. I mean, it's a hard nut to crack because you're right. I mean, we are a social species and we seek groups out. That's why we have groups. But especially environmentalists, as I said before, they're very well organized and managed, especially in their social media. And what Janice is essentially saying there is, how do you confront this incredibly this solidarity in a group of environmentalists? How do you confront that? Okay, and the answer is, you don't confront the solidarity. You you do what I was saying about internal communication. You have to empathize with them. Okay, now this and empathy works with an individual, and it works with a group. So let's say you've been thrown into the lion's den. Okay, you've been sent to a town hall meeting, and it's a group of environmental activists. Or you could say that you've just walked out the door at PDAC in Toronto, and there's a bunch of environmentalists in front of you, which there are every single year. Okay, how are you supposed to respond to them? The first thing is you listen. Okay, and first of all, that's actually kind of a bit rare. We kind of go in the defensive, which is kind of like normal. It's a normal human response, but we need to suppress that as much as we can. Okay, we shut up completely and we listen to them, and we ask them questions, not leading questions. And this is what happens on LinkedIn all the time, which is really annoying. These environmental activists, where do they think their copper comes from? Where do they think their computers come from? They're tweeting away there on their laptops and whatever. Hypocrite. So we do exactly the wrong thing in that case. Ask some questions. What are your concerns? Okay. What do you think the mining industry should be doing better? What are they doing wrong? Give them every opportunity to vent, and you do not rebut them. You do not do that. And the next thing you do is you label. Okay. This is a classic negotiation strategy. And again, it's not a mind trick. It's just what you need to do to prove to the person that you're actually listening, not just like, whatever. You're actually reflecting back to them what they have just said. Okay. Then they know that you've understood them. And then you reinforce what they've just said. You say, I can certainly understand that. I mean, if I was you, I'd be really angry about that. And you could go further and say, and can you build on what they've said and take it to the logical next step? You could say, if that's actually the case, then that company needs to be held responsible. Yeah. You're not saying that company is culpable. You're just saying, if that's really the case, I agree with you in that company needs to be held responsible. And I am just as angry as you are. I will investigate personally. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Okay. Suddenly, you're acting as an ally to them, and they actually believe you because they understand that you understand where they're coming from. Okay. And okay, this is a one-on-one, but imagine if it's a town forum, okay, and suddenly they're kind of on your side. Yeah, you're winning them over, right? But you can't win them over. You can't have them go away thinking that mining is great. Okay, that's not the objective here. The objective is to decrease the space between you and the environmentalists. Okay, that's all you can do to begin with. Okay, you need to develop the essential currency between you, which is called trust. Okay, if you don't have trust, there is no negotiation, there is no constructive communication. If you empathize with them, they will necessarily, and this is all brain science, this is all dopamine, this is all everything, they will empathize with you. And that is a huge win already. okay, without saying anything else, full stop, end of that's period, done. So then afterwards, you continue the conversation outside that forum. Yeah, you are now, your name is now associated with somebody who's potentially amenable, a potential ally within the sector, and you start to be able to move forward. Okay, then there are other steps after that, but end of the day, it all starts with listening and empathy, and truly empathizing and using that to actually decrease the space between you.
I think that that's some really wonderful insight, and I've seen it work.
Yeah,
Um, I've seen it work, and I think that this can happen whether you're talking to an environmentalist or whether you're having a hard conversation, right? And it's a you broke it down really really nicely, and giving people sort of some capability to go and test it out. And so thank you for that. My sort of cap off question for Ore-atory has been, what are you doing to make the mining industry a better place? And I think your answer might be something that is really really cool. So what are you most proud of that you're doing that's influencing us positively, despite what you're doing every day?
okay. Well, the first thing, I mean, I'm talking to many companies. I am, I'm putting out hopefully useful content, most weeks, which gets good engagement, and I'm working behind the scenes to do that. I think the one thing that I am most excited about, which will be coming online very, very soon indeed. I'm not in a position to say everything, all the details yet. As you know, my company's flagship training program was called Practical Geocommunication. From the outset of that, like literally from month one, 4 years ago, I've been approached by people within the mining sector saying they want something bespoke for the mining sector. And it took me a long time to be able to uh, generate the capital to help make this happen, but it has happened. It has been made, and this will be launched within the next month or two. And there will be more details very soon. But the recording is all finished and the course is all made, and it's going to be out there soon. So that is the most exciting thing. And as I said before, um, this town forum meeting analogy that I just sent you, and I'm looking at the time because I am aware that it needs to be capped off at 1 hour. This happened just a few months ago. A mining engineer said to me, having done practical geocommunication, um, you know, I went to town forums before and I was shot down in flames and it was a disaster. Okay. But having done your training, I went to the next one and suddenly they weren't hostile to me anymore. Suddenly the gap between us was much smaller, and and my empathy for them generated empathy for me and my company. And suddenly, you know, I thought that we were going to spend 15 years in litigation and licenses and all that kind of stuff. Now it looks like it's going to happen maybe next year. And that means our company saved potentially tens of millions of dollars, you know? And so that's all because of communication. It's not a soft skill. This is an essential hard skill that has just saved our company from potential bankruptcy. So thank you, right? And so that's just one person who was living out of Nebraska, did the town forum in New Hampshire. Now, with this new product that's coming out, I really hope, because it is bespoke for the mining industry, and it's not just about public relations. It's about investor relations, internal communications, First Nations, social media, how to do all these kind of stuff within the context of the mining industry. I really hope, really, really hope that it makes a difference in the way the public perceive the sector and how the sector communicates internally and externally.
Well, I'm really excited to see that. I'm so happy that you've gotten some funding and some really great traction. And I think that the impact that it's going to make is just going to be really fun to watch. So, congratulations, and keep me posted on it. I will obviously be watching here on the sidelines. And I really appreciate your being here, because so much of this is not talked about in the way that we did today. And so I hope that people can think about this a little bit differently and go forth and carry the torch and sort of talk and communicate in a different fashion.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Haydon, for visiting with us. And we will obviously talk offline here soon, but thanks for all of our viewers and guests, and we'll kind of stick around in the comments, and please feel free to engage on LinkedIn. And next month we have, let's see, we've got October coming up right before you know it. We've got Gus Miner next month, so that'll be a really fun conversation, and I think we're going to talk about how to extract meaning from the mining industry. So fun stuff coming.
We just want to make sure that people understand, apologize that we haven't got to everything we meant to. I see in the title we're talking about diverse thinking, AI, the future of recruitment. But you know, when Lindsey and I get together, we just dive in and we just talk about it. I think we need to do another one sometime.
I think we'll have a 2.0, and I think AI will be a really fun one. We kind of touched on the future of recruitment and certainly some diverse communication, but we've got a whole lot more to talk about. So thank you again, Haydon, and stay tuned, guys, for part 2.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Thank you.